For most of us today, not wearing deodorant is just not an option, right? But the truth is, people didn't commonly wear deodorant until about the 1940s and 50s. And even after the first deodorants were invented, many people refused to wear them because they felt it was unnecessary. Like one man who stated in a 1928 survey, "I consider body deodorant for masculine use to be sissified." Yikes. So how did we go from that to a world where forgetting to wear deodorant is embarrassing or even a social faux pas? Well, believe it or not, by the late 1800s, there were a handful of inventors who, in fact, decided that body odor was a problem worth solving. The first trademarked deodorant, called Mum, was introduced in Philadelphia in 1888. It was a thick, waxy cream that users rubbed underneath their arms to help control odor. The name was a play on the phrase, "Mum's the word," implying nobody would know your secret little weapon against body odor. While it was an innovative idea, Mum left greasy stains on clothes and wasn't especially effective. Just a few years later, other inventors took a different approach. Rather than simply masking odor, they tried to stop sweating altogether. In 1903, the first antiperspirant, EverDry, was introduced using aluminum chloride. It could prevent sweating for days at a time, but there was a major downside. It had to be suspended in acid, which could burn skin and even eat through clothing. Ouch. Then came one of the most influential early deodorants, Odor Oh-No. Its creator, Edna Murphy, got the idea from her father, a surgeon, who developed an antiperspirant to keep his hands dry during surgery. Edna recognized that the same idea could be used to combat underarm sweat and brought the product to life. Like EverDry, however, it wasn't exactly pleasant to use. Its acidic formula could irritate skin, and its reddish color often stained clothing. It certainly wasn't perfect, but it did mark the beginning of a new revolutionary product. By the early 1900s, Americans finally had products that could fight odor and even stop sweating altogether. So you'd expect people to rush out and buy them, right? They didn't. Most people saw deodorant as frivolous, and many couldn't understand why anyone would need it in the first place. Which raises an obvious question. If people weren't using deodorant and didn't think it was necessary, how were they dealing with their body odor in the first place? To understand why Americans were not rushing out to buy deodorant, you first have to understand the world in which they lived in. Compared to today, how do I put this? Life was just a bit smellier. For starters, for much of the first half of the 20th century, horses were still a common form of transportation, which left a substantial amount of manure on city streets. Homes and businesses were heated by coal, filling the air with smoke and soot, and during that same period, pretty much everybody smoked cigarettes, and smoking was allowed basically everywhere. So when you're surrounded by strong smells like these every day, you gradually stop noticing them. In other words, I think there was some serious nose blindness that was going on. In a world like that, perhaps body odor just didn't stand out the way it would today. They just simply had different ways and ideas, I guess you could say, of staying fresh. For starters, daily showers weren't a part of everyday life for Americans. Indoor plumbing spread gradually throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and running hot water just wasn't available in every home. Rather than taking a quick shower before work and each morning, many people bathed much less frequently because of that, and often relied on a weekly bath instead. To freshen up between baths, many people simply washed up in the sink with a warm washcloth. Private showers themselves didn't become commonplace in American homes until decades later, somewhere around the 1980s, when advancements in custom shower heads and jets were becoming a craze. Instead of deodorant, people relied on a variety of everyday products and home remedies. One of the most popular was talcum powder, introduced in the 1890s by Dr. Frederick B. Kilmer of Johnson & Johnson. The powder absorbed moisture, reduced friction, and helped people feel fresh throughout the day. Newspapers of the time also recommended other household absorbent powders, including using plain cornstarch. While many powders were lightly scented and could help manage body odor by keeping the skin drier, they weren't nearly as effective as modern deodorants or antiperspirants. Advice columns also suggested washing the underarms with grain alcohol, vinegar-based toilet preparations, salt water, and other antiseptic remedies in an effort to reduce the odor. Some of these methods likely helped by cleaning the skin or temporarily reducing bacteria, but there was really no single standard solution that everyone relied on. And for those worried about perspiration staining their clothes, absorbent underarm pads, which were small cloth inserts sewn or pinned inside garments, helped soak up sweat before it reached the fabric. Clothing itself also played a role. Natural fibers like cotton, linen, and wool generally breathed better than many of today's synthetic fabrics, allowing moisture to evaporate more easily. For most people, these routines were enough. A little body odor wasn't considered the end of the world. It was just a part of being human. You know, as long as you bathed every once in a while, put on some clean clothes, maybe dabbed on some perfume, there was really no point in buying some fancy new product called deodorant. And that's where Odor Ono's creator Edna Murphy found herself stuck. She had spent years refining her product, but convincing Americans to buy it proved to be far more difficult than inventing it. So she turned to one of New York City's biggest advertising agencies, where she was paired with a copywriter named James Young. At first, Young tried the obvious approach. His advertisements emphasized that Odor Ono had been developed by a doctor and presented excessive perspiration as a medical problem with a scientific solution. The campaign helped generate some interest, but sales were still not where Murphy hoped they would be. So, Young had to go back to the drawing board. He had to understand why women weren't taking the bait. The agency even conducted a door-to-door survey and found that nearly every woman had heard of Odor Ono, but about 2/3 insisted they simply didn't need it. With understanding this revelation, Young had to completely change his strategy. He went for a more severe approach and decided to turn perspiration into something women would feel embarrassed about. So in 1919, he went all in, publishing his now infamous advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal, which was titled "Within the Curve of a Woman's Arm," a frank discussion of a subject too often avoided. For the time, it was shocking. The ad opened with, "A woman's arm. Poets have sung about it, great artists have painted its beauty. It should be the daintiest, sweetest thing in the world, and yet, unfortunately, it isn't always." The message was pretty clear. Basically, they were saying, women, you probably smell bad, and worse, you might not even know it. It was the beginning of a new style of advertising. Ads like these implied that body odor could quietly ruin relationships, cost women their social standing, and even prevent them from finding a husband. At the time, openly discussing perspiration or other bodily functions was still considered improper, making the advertisement shockingly bold for this era. And because of that, many readers were horrified. More than 200 subscribers canceled their subscription to Ladies' Home Journal over the advertisement. But while people complained, they also started buying deodorant. Odor Ono's sales jumped 112% in 1920, and competitors quickly learned that Odor Ono had stumbled onto something very powerful, with women being convinced that perspiration basically would ruin their whole social lives. Deodorant was practically flying off the shelves. Because it was so effective, this style of advertising quickly became the norm for the industry. Like this one that bluntly declared, "Beautiful but dumb. She's never learned the first rule of long-lasting charm." At this point, there was still one problem though. Men still were not buying it. For instance, by the 1950s, only about half of American men were using deodorant regularly compared to nearly 90% of women. For decades, advertisements had focused almost exclusively on women. And to many men, body odor was still associated with strength, hard work, and masculinity. It was still not something to be embarrassed about. Their first solution was to convince women who were already buying deodorant to start buying it for their husbands as well. For example, one advertisement urged, "Women, it's time to stop letting your men be smelly. When you buy too." But it didn't really work. Advertisers eventually realized men would need a completely different sales pitch. Ads promised something else: success. As more Americans entered office jobs in the decades surrounding World War II, that message became more effective. Deodorant became part of looking polished, disciplined, and successful for men. Companies also redesigned their products to look unmistakably masculine. Brands like Seaforth, for example, packaged deodorant in ceramic whiskey jugs. What's more manly than that? And little by little, it worked. By the 60s and 70s, improved formulas, roll-ons inspired by the ballpoint pen, sticks, and aerosol sprays made deodorant easier and more convenient than ever before. Today, deodorant is an industry worth more than $18 billion worldwide and became something millions of people use every single day. It's topics like this that make me grateful I live in the year 2026. I mean, I can't imagine living in a world where nobody felt they needed to wear deodorant. Then again, if I lived 100+ years ago, maybe I would have suffered from nose blindness like everybody else. Who knows? What's interesting is that even today, we are debating whether or not some ingredients used in deodorant is healthy for us. I myself have been trying to find a natural deodorant with little to no luck, but I'm curious to know what you think. Are we just victims of a successful marketing campaign? Should we embrace our natural smells more? Or is deodorant just one of those inventions that you're grateful has become an everyday staple?